All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. We are going to give people just a few more minutes to join, and then we are going to kick things off. All right, we are 3 minutes past the hour. We are going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on managing insider risks in the manufacturing sector. This is a topic that does not get enough attention, in my opinion, and so I'm really excited about covering this today. Before we dig in, just a quick intro on me. I'm Dr. Christine Zwakhor, the host for today's conversation. Quick background on me, I have worked in the cybersecurity industry for over a decade now, leading a variety of different cybersecurity functions for large companies like United Airlines, before taking on my current role as the founder and CEO of Cyber Pop-Up, which is an on-demand security services platform. I also earned a PhD in security engineering, so just literally obsessed with this space, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. Now, when most people hear about the manufacturing industry, they might think about everything from, building and manufacturing electronic devices to furniture to vehicles and more, right? It's a very broad space. But what most people don't tend to think about are the cybersecurity risks facing these organizations. And so we want to really dig into this more by covering a couple of different things today. We'll start with recent cyber threats that are emerging in manufacturing environments. We'll get into real world attacks against manufacturing organizations and really dig into who the real insider risks or threats are in this space. So, is it the engineers? Is it facility staff? Is there somebody else we should be paying attention to here? Who really poses the greatest risk when it comes to insider threat and insider risk in the manufacturing space? Then I'll talk through what some of the challenges are in combating these threats, as well as tips for managing the risk in the manufacturing sector and beyond, right? A lot of this stuff can transcend and apply to different industries. You'll also get a chance to see how you can leverage technology to reduce these risks in real time. So we'll have Suzanne from Variata also come on the end to share some of that as well. Now, I want to jump right in and start by level setting on this sort of technical evolution that has happened in manufacturing, mainly due to operational technology. I'll do that. I'll also share a couple of stats that I think truly set the context on risks and threats in this landscape. So first, again, a bit of context on operational technology and sort of this manufacturing space for those who might be unfamiliar. So often abbreviated as OT. right? Operational technology is basically the practice of using hardware and software to control industrial equipment and its primary interactions with the physical world. So a couple of terms you might hear in the space, right, are looking at industrial control systems, programmable logic controllers, distributed control systems, SCADA systems. These are all terms that you typically hear of when you think about operational technology. Ultimately, these environments supervise physical processes such as manufacturing, right, energy, medicine, building management, and so many other industries. A basic example of this is, let's say you're in a manufacturing plant, right, where there's machines and robots, let's say, being used to assemble something, right? There has to be a control system that allows you to tell that robot what to do and to manage that and maintain it, right? All of that is done through operational technology and systems. Now, with every extension of a connected system, right, and every extra link, every extra device in this chain of automated operational technology just comes extra vulnerability, right? And so for every new function in a connected world, right, which is what this is, becoming more and more of, there are those new threats. And so it's become evident in the latest trends, some of which I'll talk through in a bit, that this is an area that we cannot ignore and that we really have to continue to pay attention to from a cybersecurity standpoint. So jumping into some of the stats here, one that I found interesting, 81% of manufacturing organizations are concerned about cyber risks with personal interconnected devices. In response to that, actually, 72% don't allow those devices to connect to their corporate networks on the manufacturing floor. So I say that to say, like, people are recognizing this risk, right, and taking pretty intentional measures to try to reduce that risk, especially the risk that comes from the human being. We're talking about insider risk, right, and how to manage that, right? And so being able to implement controls and implement things that reduce that are trends that we're seeing. So people are really paying attention to this. And that concern comes with very good reason, right? So according to another report, 74% of operational technology reliant businesses experienced a notable cyber incident in the last year, which begs the question, is what companies are doing today enough to combat these threats? It's probably not, right? It's like if you look at the last stat, the majority of people are really trying to put in measures to do something about this, yet 74% are still experiencing incidents. It's like, what are we missing here, right? Another interesting stat that I think ties into that well also is 78% of manufacturing organizations do have a process for dealing with cyber incidents. So we all know that preparation is key, right? It's very important to know what to do. And I think it's a testament to the fact that, yes, there's some preventative stuff that's being put in place to prevent these risks. Clearly, that's not working as effectively as we would want it to by the amount of attacks that continue to happen. And so it's almost like this next kind of iteration or this next focus of like, okay, well, if we can't, beat this, let's make sure that we're prepared, right? And that's the trend that we're seeing across the industry. And I think that ties into the overall direction of where the space of insider threat and insider risk is heading in general. You'll notice as I talk through this and some of the trends and things that you'll see, there's this sort of shift that's happening from looking at these risks from an insider threat standpoint and that common label that we tend to hear, to transitioning more into insider risk, right? And that ties into really, instead of very reactively looking at threats, and threat hunting is huge, right? And chasing after those issues, that's very important, right? I'll never downplay the importance of threat hunting and looking for risks, but it's really that transition from looking at insider threat to looking at actual insider risk and being much more proactive and being able to, I think, talk about insider risks in a way that makes sense for the business, right? Across an organization, people tend to understand business risk more than understanding just the subset of threat. And so that's another kind of natural shift and transition that we're starting to see in the industry as well. Another stat that came up is looking into sort of why are these attacks happening, and what's enabling them, and why is this such an attractive space? And so one thing to keep in mind, right, is that attacks against manufacturing can often disrupt supply chains, which is where big money resides, as I'm sure many people on this call know. And so there's been an 80% increase in supply chain attacks as of recent. And I'll share some examples of what this looks like in reality in a bit, but I think the topic of supply chains, because of the literal kind of chain reaction that comes when you're able to impact or disrupt a part of a supply chain, makes it a much more attractive area for attackers. And so we've seen increases in that space as well. And then last one that, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention in terms of trends in this space. This is impacting a lot of different industries, but that is ransomware. So ransomware cost the world $20 billion last year. Billion, huge number. And it's predicted that that cost will reach 265 billion in the next couple of years. And so when you have supply chains and things on the line, the pressure is higher, and the likelihood that an organization who's crippled by ransomware, right, whose supply chain has been disrupted, the likelihood that they'll consider, paying a ransom or doing whatever they need to do to get out of that situation becomes higher. And so greater incentive to some of these malicious individuals as well. Nice tie into the last stat here, though. I talked about sort of being prepared and being more proactive, right? 68% of manufacturing businesses have a response plan for ransomware attacks. And so companies know that this is an issue, and again, are trying their best to prepare to respond. So I know that this piece ties a little bit on both the proactive side and the reactive side, right? It's like being prepared for to address a ransomware attack, right? To a certain extent, that's that preparation and the pre-work that has to happen. But it's also a little bit reactive because now you're in essence responding to this attack. And so I think the key term here, the key takeaway here is to, yes, be prepared in case something does go wrong, of course, but also invest heavily, and I think more importantly, in preventing it altogether, right? So that response plan just becomes sort of your backup or your sort of safety net, so to speak, to reduce the amount of damage in the event that something does happen. Now, shifting gears into more on where insider risk and insider threat and manufacturing meet. So there's a couple of different kind of layers to this, right? I think when most people think of insider threats and risks, they're typically thinking about, back office employees, people who are on their computers all day, who, might have access to certain systems or might have access to sensitive data. And while, yes, those are insiders in any industry, right? The reality is that everyone in an organization in today's day and age, where we continue to go through this, digital transformation, pretty much everyone is using technology in companies, right? And so everyone plays a role, right? Whether it's your engineers or plant operators or facilities maintenance personnel, management, vendors, anyone who is using technology becomes a part of that insider environment. When you think about operational technology, for example, like who's running it, who's building it, right? The developers who are actually coding and building some of this, hardware and some of the software that's involved. Who's maintaining it? Who's supplying it, right? If you're building something but you're using different suppliers from different places, it's like that. Those third parties and those suppliers become a part of the landscape as well. And so it's really the entire manufacturing ecosystem, right? The other piece to pay attention to, of course, are the motives. There's both of course, from an insider standpoint, the folks who are just, for lack of better terms, oblivious or moving too quickly and take actions that they shouldn't take or do something on accident. There's, of course, always those pieces, but I think one of the scarier or most critical things in the manufacturing sector, especially, are the malicious insiders. These are folks who are, for example, getting recruited via the dark web to do things to negatively impact manufacturing, being influenced to steal and sell intellectual property from these manufacturing organizations. And when you think about, depending on the type of devices or the type of operations you're running, when that information and that intellectual property gets into the wrong hands, right? What are the ramifications? What are the risks associated with that? So that's a huge one in this space, and you'll hear more about that when I walk through a couple of breach examples in a second. But there is so much intellectual property, or IP for abbreviation, at risk here, especially when it comes to insiders, whether that's intentional or unintentional. I saw a survey, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something along the lines of the fact that most employees believe that any data they've created or worked on, whether it was in a company system or not, that data belongs to them. They believe that they own a piece of that data because they're the ones who created it, which, when you think about intellectual property and the ownership of that within an organization, that's typically not the case, right? But because employees tend to feel that sense of ownership, they feel very comfortable with taking that information with them, whether it's when they leave the company, if they go on to another place, or if as they continue to work with the company. And so that IP is something to think about very deeply in this space, as well as I had touched on earlier, third parties, right, are something to continue to pay attention to as well. Now, I'm going to walk through a couple of quick examples of what this looks like in action, just to dig into that more. So the first one that I'll talk through real quick is the Dupont breach, sorry. So in this case, a research chemist from the company pled guilty to basically misappropriating the company's IP. And so what happened is that following this former employee's resignation from the company, they discovered that he had downloaded approximately 22,000 abstracts from the company's data library, and had also accessed just under 20,000 documents or so. All of the information that he was accessing, they found out had absolutely nothing to do with his primary research responsibilities as a chemist, and had nothing to do with the areas of expertise that he had. And so yeah, that was a red flag, of course. It's estimated that this breach cost the company north of $400 million, just in terms of the risk that was exposed by this data leaving the company. But yeah, once they discovered this issue, right, they contacted the FBI, did a search of this employee's home, found documents stored on several computers from the company. This is, a couple of years after the employee has left, mind you. They found, files on the computers. They found, printouts that clearly he was trying to shred and like burn in the fireplace. Actually, it's reported that when the agents entered his house, he was already running almost like a secure erasure program to try to delete as much stuff as he could off of those devices. Thankfully, they were able to get to it before he deleted everything. And so as a result, and this is kind of a hard pill to swallow in terms of risk and impact and all of that. The punishment for this was he got sentenced to 18 months in prison and a fine of $30,000, as well as restitution a little bit under $15,000. So when you think about the impact to the company, that $400 million I mentioned initially, compared to, there's no comparison in recuperating that, or the balance there. And so yeah, in situations like this, it's like this goes back to that, being more, preventative and being more proactive, right? It's like, how can we prevent something from this like happening versus react and respond. And I mean, yes, it's great that it was detected, 2 years later or however long it took. It's great that it was detected and that they were able to get the right people involved and do something about it, but how can we avoid these things altogether when possible? Another one is with Hanes. So popular clothing manufacturer, of course, many people might recognize this one as well. They were the victim of a cyber attack that took place where basically this attacker pretended to be a guest customer who was checking on an order. They were able to leverage different gaps in the security of the systems. There are basically a bunch of holes in the system that allowed this attacker to access the company's customer database with nearly 1 million addresses, phone numbers, credit card information, things like that. This impacted 900,000 folks. And while the attacker wasn't able to get access to much beyond that, it sounds like that's still, of course, a lot of information, which prompted them to have to, notify their customers and go through that entire process in response. And so this is another example of an attack that is not necessarily, I would say, a huge insider one like the first one. It was like clearly that person in the Dupont example was stealing intellectual property for whatever reason. In this case, this is more of how these attacks can play out in the manufacturing space at all, and just showcasing that it's not just Hanes is a clothing manufacturer, right? It's a clothing brand, and there's still this there's still a part of this conversation, right? So just showing the breadth and the scope of how this plays out in the manufacturing sector there. Another one, this is related to insider threat again. This was with the FACC. This is an attack that targeted their accounting department. For those who don't know, this is an Australian airplane component manufacturer that experienced this breach that resulted in $55 million in losses due to fraud. This fraud started with a whaling attack, which, if you're not familiar, is just a more advanced version of a phishing attack. So in this case, a cyber criminal is sending an email that appears to be from a very senior executive at the company. So they're impersonating a CEO or something at that level. That's the difference between phishing and whaling. And so in this case, they are impersonating the company's CEO, asked an employee to send funds related to a fake acquisition. That employee believed it and followed through with the transactions. And so that ended very badly, clearly. And so in the aftermath of that, unfortunately, the CEO and CFO both were removed from the company as a result. Someone was arrested in connection with the attack. However, the way that person, it's not even clear that person was like the main person behind the account. They were just, as they tried to like launder the money to different places, one of the trails led to this person who they were able to arrest. And so yeah, another example, insider risk, right? Somebody unknowingly, fell for a whaling attack and sent this money. In some cases, we've seen people act like, I'm not saying that's the case here, but in some cases, we've seen people actually be in on it, right? And act like it was an accident when it really wasn't. They were, kind of convinced to be the one to, fall for this phishing email or whatever the case may be. We see that kind of recruiting happening on the dark web also. And so another example there, the last one that I'll touch on, then we'll get more into, solutions and what we can do about this stuff. The last one is on Norsk Hydro. So they experienced a ransomware attack. So tying all these back to some of those stats that we saw earlier, right? These continue to play out in reality, right? So In this case, they were hit with a ransomware attack. They're an aluminum manufacturer who operates in 40 countries. They ended up having to close many of their plants and move a lot of them to operations offline. This attack not only impacted this company, but a couple of others. The cost is estimated at 75 million. In this case, the way that the attackers were able to get in and deploy this ransomware, researchers believe they did it through gathering credentials through a phishing attack. And using that to get into the systems. And so, again, it's that same kind of insider, right? Of, somebody might have, fallen for something, or somebody did something that compromised their credentials. Now somebody's able to use those credentials to get into the system. And you have that sort of, sometimes they call it like, almost like blind insider threat, where it's like, somebody's using valid credentials in your network. And so how do you even know that it's not the actual employee? And that's where a lot of traditional methods for trying to understand insider risk fall short, right? When you actually have somebody whose valid credentials are being used on the network, it can be hard to distinguish whether that's, valid or not. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But yeah, this was another one. Again, it impacted way more companies, 2 U.S. chemical manufacturing firms included in that. And then, yeah, I mean, I could go on and on. Nissan was another manufacturer who got hit with ransomware and was forced to stop production in their plants around the world. So yeah, I say all that to say, like, of course, this isn't theory, right? This isn't suspicion. Like, these are things that are happening, and these are trends that we continue to see grow. Now, shifting gears, I want to just recap some of the points we've discussed already, just in talking about what these challenges are up to, so that we can then talk about what we do about it. So a couple of things to call out here, right, on what's behind some of these risks and what's making it so hard to reduce the risk in this space. One is the rapid evolution of operational technology, and the fact that security in this space has been more, I know I keep saying this over and over again, but security in the space has been more reactive than proactive, in a sense that people have the evolution of operational technology and the evolution of this convergence between physical and information systems has evolved at a more rapid pace than security has been able to keep up with. And so hence you see the growing gap of cybersecurity risk there. Another one, of course, is network complexity. So again, that convergence of physical and information technology systems, it just leads to a lot of interconnected systems that are complicated, and quite honestly, in some cases, as I'm sure people on this call probably know, pretty difficult to manage. That then leads to a lack of visibility, right? So it starts to spiral and kind of snowball. That complexity then leads to a lack of visibility, and thus poor management, right? And thus poor ability to secure these spaces adequately. And so that's another challenge that I think organizations are facing in this space. And then, of course, I touched on already advanced ransomware attacks. Really big issue for the industry that will continue to evolve, especially as you see sort of a double extortion trends in this space, right? So in the manufacturing industry, for example, it's like launching attacks where it's like, okay, not only are we going to use ransomware to lock you out of your systems and halt your operations, but also we're going to take your intellectual property and threaten to leak that as well if you don't pay, right? So it's not just the ransom, it's also now this risk of data exposure and data leakage. And again, intellectual property in a lot of industries, and especially in manufacturing, it's really important to keep that stuff inside the organization and not let it get out. And so so yeah, just these more advanced ransomware attacks are a concern for sure. And then also had touched on before, right, the ties into the sophistication of supply chain attacks, when you're able to use things like ransomware to bring supply chains, to disrupt them, or bring them to a halt, right? It can have much larger implications than traditional attack methods. Phishing, social engineering, all a part of that sort of insider risk element. I could go on and on, right? IP theft, we've talked about quite a bit, with all of the interconnection that happens with operational technology that ties into, IoT, and all of the attacks happening against those devices. And so all of these things tie together. But yeah, there's bottom line is, with as this space grows, like I mentioned in the beginning, that vulnerability just continues to rise and evolve. And so we have to, of course, adapt to that and figure out how we address these challenges. And so from the standpoint of insider risk, especially in being more proactive, one of the biggest recommendations is always to build a user-centric threat management program, or user-centric risk management program, right? So being able to keep users at the core is the first piece at the very least, right? So you want to ensure that you're building your cybersecurity program in a way that is cohesive and empowering to users, and centering everything around them. And there's a couple of ways to do that, right? One is through very strong training and awareness. This goes a long way, right? It's like whether you're looking at unintentional or intentional malicious individuals, training and awareness helps, right? It's like on one end, you're helping people understand what cybersecurity risks exist especially in your industry, right? It's important to tailor that to the folks that you're talking to. But then also it helps to educate folks on I feel like just the impact that some of these actions that may seem so simple or so negligible, to really understand what are the impacts of some of these actions, what are the consequences of some of these actions, right? It's like, although we don't want this sort of punishment to be the only thing that's deterring insiders from doing bad things, right? It's like we want to hope that we like to think that we're hiring good people, right, who just genuinely don't want to do anything to hurt the company, right? But it's like, if you do have that one person who is, I don't know, financially struggling, and gets hit up by somebody who's saying, hey, I'm going to pay you a certain amount if you just click on this link and help me out with getting into this company. And somebody who may have the best of intentions, if struggling, might start to think twice about that option, right? But it's like, if that person also has been through training and awareness and heard stories of people who have been fined and gone to jail, and all of these things that happen when you commit these crimes, because they're essentially crimes, right? Some people don't realize that that's exactly what this is. Then it helps out to a certain extent as well. So I think that awareness is important. And then beyond that, of course, technology and processes matter a lot. That is, you cannot have one without the other. You need both of them to be successful. And so when it comes to technology, some of the biggest things, especially in building a user-centric program, is to, of course, manage access very well, especially when it comes to operational technology and some of the emerging technologies that we're seeing. Being able to manage third-party risks, getting to the user level a bit more. This one is absolutely critical. Being able to understand what users are doing on the network and on their devices, and being able to do that in a way that is intelligent, through things like user behavior analytics. That way, you're not just relying on the traditional sort of indicators that something might be off, or that there's insider risk, right? It's like you're really using data from various sources, and you're really using real-time context to understand, like, hey, even if this person is using valid credentials, and they might look like they're coming from the right geographical location, like, what else might be off about their behavior that can alert me, or give some kind of insider risk insight into whether I should really trust this person or not, right? Is the language that they're using normal for what's typical for this person? And so it's being able to paint that bigger picture for a user to understand, again, what level of risk you might be dealing with and whether you need to dig into that more. Of course, ransomware response is really important as well. I've touched on the risks there quite a bit, and so it's being able to not only sort of prevent these ransomware attacks from happening, but it's like if being able to detect it if you realize that ransomware is in your environment, right? It's like how can you stop the spread? How can you, remove the ransomware, hopefully without paying the ransom, right? People have different views on whether you should consider paying or not, right? But ultimately, I think everybody's goal is to not have to pay ransoms, right? And so leveraging processes and leveraging technology that can allow you to securely back up your data in an offsite or in a segmented or different environment where you can't have your ransomware, lock up your systems and then realize that it's also locked up the area where your backups, were stored as well, right? At that point, your backups are useless, right? You can't use them. And so having a strategy that accounts for all of those things becomes really important as well. And then just overall in general, this ties into some of the recommendations I've made already, but I think it's this notion of really looking at next generation threat detection and response tools that can allow you to just better manage and better and more proactively kind of find these issues up front and respond to them in ways that are early enough so that you're not necessarily dealing with the full impacts of these issues. So I know I've said quite a bit there, but hopefully that gives you a sense of the threat landscape and the risk landscape when it comes to manufacturing today, and what some of the key things that should be done, especially when it comes to managing the evolution of insider risks. Now, I always say it's better to, of course, show what this looks like in action and to show some of the real sort of solutions and ways to combat this rather than me just talking about it. And so for that, we have Suzanne Parent on the webinar as well, who is going to walk you through a few things that can help solve a lot of the challenges and a lot of the threats that I have talked about today. So I'm just going to hand over control here.
Thank you
and
very
welcome
much.
to
Thank you. I hope everything is well for everyone. And I just want to remind the attendees that the chat box is open to any questions that you may have throughout the session. And we will answer them potentially right there on the chat or even live between Christine and myself. So I'm sharing my screen. I believe it's the Ransom Safe screen right now.
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you, Christine. So I'm going to do this in two parts. So I think all the information that Christine has conveyed today really brings up, now what do I do? And so what I'd like to discuss and what I'd like to present is a way for you to mitigate some of the ransomware attacks where you can be protected, and how you can be proactive and reactive on the fronts of monitoring for activities that might be more risky or threatening for your confidential information or IP theft. So I'm going to start with Ransom Safe. So what's Ransom Safe, and why do we say in our solution and in any solution, why is antivirus not enough to combat ransomware? And of course, antivirus is something that is from the outside. You're really protecting everything that comes into your organization. And it's important to know that that's just one piece. We're looking at malware. We're looking at initiated machines attacks that come in through the most odd ways that we mentioned: phishing, whaling, all these things that now the ransomware are coming in to you through normal work activities. So it's important to know that you have to be protected for antivirus, absolutely. But now we're looking at something much more nefarious, and that's the ransomware attacks and how to combat those, and which tools should you be looking at. Well, one of the tools that we have, which is called Ransom Safe, is really kind of dealing with the installation of a software on your servers. So we're looking at the server. We're looking at infiltration from the user's point of view into the server. The files that are being accessed every day by your employees might carry a ransomware. So what we've done is we can detect those ransomware attacks specifically that are known to the industry. We can alert you, but what we do that's very different is we're backing up all those files that your employees have touched at any way, shape, or form. So delete, edit, renamed, moved, those kinds of documents that have actually been changed are saved so you can quickly recover. We talked about the FBI saying always don't pay a ransomware. And you need to be prepared on how to detect that and how to prevent it. So these are the 5 steps that we have. And now how do we do that? We have 2 methods. So one's called the file screening method, and the other method is called the deception method, which is referred to as honeypot in this slide here. So file screening is really where we're looking at the known variants. So we're not talking about a COVID environment, but we're talking about a variant here of known entity, and we update that variant almost every day so that we're aware of these different, what we call kits, and those kits carry the ransomware. So with the file screening, we can block and stop the user from making any more damage in your file server. The honeypots are those that are not known variants, so that didn't show up today and the database hasn't been updated. So a honeypot is really a deception method where we strategically position files that are known to us, and if they're being affected by a ransomware, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to lock and block the user and notify the admin. Once that's done, then the admin can then choose to restore all those files through the ransom safe, and every single copy is kept. The key here is we're locking down the user so they can't make any more damage. Why is ransom safe really efficient? It really only takes 10 minutes to install on your servers. It's a secondary layer, so it really protects. So you could tell me, well, I have backups. Yes, you have backups, but are they 7 days old, 5 days old, 2 days old, even a day old? You're already trying to find the files that you need to restore. Here, the files are right there, they're accessible, and from a cost or ROI basis, the millions of dollars that Christina was mentioning, you're covered for all the files that might be infected by ransom safe. So that takes care of the high level overview of ransom safe, and if absolutely reach out to us for a demo on that as well. So let me now fall into the next part, which is the risk, the threat. What can you do? What does it look like? And what is our product called Cerebral offer? So we're basically encompassing 3 things. The platform is focused on either insider threat or risk and gives you the ability to collect the information to be proactive about what's going on. The engagement of an employee, whether it's security engagement or productivity engagement, along with compliance. So making sure that the company's compliance rules or compliance are being enforced or being followed, you can also track and understand better. So the security is across all of those 3 pillars. The platform Cerebral is really made up of three things. It's one platform, first of all. It carries and gathers data across all the elements of a user. So we talked about behavior analytics, we talk about activity monitoring, and we talked about risk score. So I'm going to start at the end, where risk score is really to help you be proactive on the types of behavior that they're doing, plus the activities that they're doing really will give you a scoring, just like a FICO score in your finance. This will give you a risk score within the organization. All organizations do have a duty of care for their data and, of course, of their customers. So when it comes to confidential information, when it comes to plans, or when it comes to R&D work, inventions, anything that's proprietary, especially in the manufacturing space, there's a lot of great ideas that come up and ways and processes to change things. These are confidential to each company. So it's important that all that data is protected. So what we do is we have and tested many different machine learning techniques through the DARPA supported environment. We've considered psychological factors and data that's passed. So we have consistently been ahead in the testing and results. Let's talk a little bit about insider risk and security and compliance. So today, not a surprise, it's been on for 2 years now, the communication between an employee and where they're located. So today we still have and will continue to have employees working from home. And the file that leaves your server that is being accessed by your employee has now created a compliance, what we refer to as a compliance nightmare, because your document has been moved off-site, and so you're already in violation of that. But what we can do is we don't lose track of that document because we consistently and constantly track the data very quickly on the endpoint and send it over to the server. Same thing with all the IP information that's all over the place in various locations, could be anywhere around the world, in fact, that the data is being moved all at once or individually. You need to be able to track those. So same kind of information. So how does this really work, and what kind of devices do we track? So of course, Microsoft OS, Mac OS, Android phones, and we newly added the Chrome devices as well. So all that data that is collected locally is sent to the server through the cloud and collected and aggregated. So we have the ability to now, we have all the data to be able to do some comparative analysis, some anomaly detections, some keyword alerts, some event alerts. We have the ability to give you the information that you need to make those decisions and be more proactive about looking at the employees' activities. I talked about details, and I talked about anomaly detection. Well, in order to be able to determine a comparative analysis, we start by collecting the information, and that includes the documents that they've moved, the files that they've transferred, all the applications that they use. A whole list of activities is gathered, stored, and then analyzed through our statistical analysis or through various algorithms. This is a view of how we manage those endpoints, and I'll spend just a few minutes on the platform before the end. But this is the way that we track all the endpoints, where they are, if they're responding. So in an organization, whether it's 10 users or 10,000 users or 100,000 users, we're tracking every single one of them in terms of the deployment. And from a managing environment, it's much simpler to be able to see it this way. And then the next piece is really to look at the people. So you can look at the people individually, or you can look at the people in groups. So when you look at the people in groups, you can group the individuals in roles or in locations. You have no specific restrictions when it comes to grouping those users. And then finally, when you talk about configurations, we integrate with Active Directory. We can export to SIM platforms, especially if you're trying to look at security from a holistic point of view and want to bring all the data from all the security points into one large SIM platform and do some comparative analysis there. And then the risk score, when I talked earlier, what's a risk score? And we're going to jump into that in a second. So when we look at a risk score, every employee will have a score based on their activity level, based on their user behavior analytics. And we basically capture about 25 of those variables between the detailed level and the ability to do the behavior analytics to put a score out. Well, of course, the data is very important. And as I said, everybody's got a duty of care for the data. So we give you the ability to not only see the data, analyze the data, but also give you the ability to control who has access to that data. So role-based security is critical to an environment with all the users from all sorts of level. The features that you see of each one of those individuals that have access to the data. Can they see alert? Can they change alerts? So it's critical to have control over that. And then finally on the event-based, whose role is it to see what piece of data? Again, can all be controlled here. So the complete insider threat intelligence platform really takes you through watching, analyzing, alerting, seeing the data is really between reports, dashboards, and then you react accordingly. So with that, what I want to do is to jump into the platform and so that's the console. We're going to log into the console and we're going to drop in right into, in this case, we're going to drop right into the risk scores. So when you see your risk scores, this is the live platform. You're seeing one person, in this case, it's Gina. We're going to go look at Gina Underhill, everything that Gina has done, her previous score, her current score, what she logged in as, and then what her risk over the last 30 days. So all this data is very high level, but now that I want to see more for her, I just click right into her name and I can see exactly the load or the level of activities that she's had and the weight of the risk that she has created in order to give herself that 43 as a current risk. So files transfers, page printed, cloud uploads, these are all elements that give you the data behind the risk score. So let's go into the monitoring chart. So I think I have like 3 minutes before I hand it over back to Christine so she can close it off. But again, don't forget to put any questions in your in the chat. So what do you need to look at? You need to look at event alerts. So now we're talking about the detailed level of information that we're capturing. So document tracking, for example, is a big one when you're talking about my proprietary documents, the plans, the inventions, and you can create alerts to tell you exactly who's moving what document and where. So for example, here I've got a chart. I make it a little bit bigger. So we're seeing that Tara Sullivan is one of the culprits in terms of transferring a lot of files. It could be correctly okay for her to have moved all these files, but it certainly would ring a lot of bells when you're looking at the data and you're seeing all these uploads from Tara. So every single one of these, by the way, you can see they're highlighting. That means that each one of those links are live. So as I quickly go through it, I can see all the files that have been moved. I can see the date, and I'm looking at her specifically because that was the chart that was looking at it. But that doesn't limit me. I can look at all the groups. I can look at Tara within a group, but I can also look at any screenshots associated with all the work that she's doing. So we capture screenshots as well throughout time, giving you the ability to go through the activities that she's done and transferring the size of the files. You can see quickly that these are a lot of these large files. These are confidential files, patient files, and all the information is captured for you to see. I've got 5 minutes, and I think I need to begin to send this back to Christine. But I just want to point out that all these charts and reports and the ability to look at data and explore the data, you can be actively looking, or you can also set yourself certain alerts based on event alerts. And again, all those things are particular to your business, particular to your, what is a threat for you, what is a file that needs to be monitored, and watch exactly what you need to do. I could go on, but I'm going to stop here because that's a really a good place to stop and hand it over to you, Christine.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for the overview, and then also for being able to show the platform and show what it looks like in practice. I think that's super helpful for folks to see. I know we only have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to squeeze just one question in, and then of course, if for folks who had additional questions, please reach out to the team. I'll share an email address in a second. But one quick question is, in terms of the scores and how they're generated. So this user is asking, like, that seems like a very powerful feature, right? How do you determine at a high level those different categories that we're seeing across the one screen around, you know, espionage and financial fraud? It seems like there's some contributors or things to categorize that. Can you speak more to that process and how that works?
Yeah, so it's important to have the data from both areas. So user behavior analytics is really looking at behavior changes and from a baseline. So because we've built a baseline over 30 days, that baseline changes. It's a moving average, so it's really more around the statistical analysis and the deviations from their current norm. And in fact, you mentioned in the beginning or somewhere in your talk that, you know, when somebody logs in as someone else but using known credentials, it's very difficult to determine if is it really them. So part of that is that behavior analytics that really notices a behavior in the baseline. So if all of a sudden they're going to a resource that isn't their resource that they normally go to, that's a flag right away, and then there's an alert that's pushed out, and then somebody can determine, oh wait, this is not the employee, in fact.
Mhm.
So it's key to be able to get that baseline combined with the detailed behind those activities. So we'll see that the file that was moved. And then we take, of those data, we take 25 data points and we run it through an algorithm. And it's that algorithm that determines the risk score. You could change what the points mean. 500, 300 is a risk. So it really depends. Every single item will have a weight on the activities that they do. And that's why it's important to have those two items on and live collecting to be able to do risk score. It's a great feature to have because it really hones you in on, well, where do I go first? It's your kind of your first thing in the day that says, well, who is most likely or what's going on in my organization from a risk level.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're just about out of time. We have about 1 minute left. Do you have a like 15-second last tip or a closing thought to share with everyone as we
Um,
wrap up?
one thing I do want to share is that every organization should be prepared and have an insider threat program in place of some sort. It doesn't have to be an extensive 6 to 12-month program, but at least know what you need to do and be prepared should it happen. I mean, there
Mhm.
are very good organizations today that will do that assessment for you, but you always need the data behind it. So start with collecting your data, but also plan to put an insider threat program in place.
Awesome. Well said. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for sharing your valuable perspective and for the deep overview. Super helpful. Thank you to all of our attendees for spending the last hour with us. If you have questions or you want to schedule a demo, please reach out to the team at sales@veriato.com. And in the meantime, hope you enjoyed this. Stay safe and secure out there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.